Welcome to Strategies for a Successful Interview, one of the online workshops brought to you by the Office of Career Services. Today we'll talk about the steps you can take to ensure that your interview is successful. First, we'll discuss ways to effectively prepare for your interview. Next, we'll talk about a few types of interview questions: traditional questions, behavioral questions, and case questions, and look at some samples. Then we'll discuss questions you should ask the employer. Finally, we'll conclude with the next steps to take once the interview is over. How do you effectively prepare for an interview? First, it's important to research the company you're interviewing with. Check the employer's website and read any literature you may have picked up at events. Do a Google search so that you're up to date on recent information about the organization, and follow them on LinkedIn. Consider using LinkedIn or the Harvard Alumni Association's alumni database to find alums at organizations that interest you and schedule an informational interview with them. Then, prepare some questions to ask the employer to better understand whether the position is a good fit for you and to underscore your interest in the job. It's not only important to know the employer, but it's also crucial that you know yourself. You need to be able to articulate to the employer what your relevant skills and experiences are and why they make you a good fit for the position. You should also be familiar with and prepared to discuss everything on your resume. Employers and organizations are interested in knowing what extracurricular activities, concentration, and work experiences you've chosen to put your time and energy into and why. Finally, practice interview techniques and answering questions with roommates, friends, family, tutors, OCS counselors, and InterviewStream, an online interview practice tool accessible through the OCS website. They can help check to make sure you're making eye contact, that your explanations are clear, and that you're effectively connecting your experiences to the questions you're asked. Prior to your interview, there are a few things to keep in mind. It will be helpful to map out the location the day before your interview. This will ensure that you arrive 10 to 15 minutes before your scheduled interview so that you have time to relax and compose yourself before the interview begins. Make sure to dress appropriately. A well-groomed professional appearance is essential. Both men and women should generally plan to wear a fairly conservative suit in a conservative color. In some creative fields, you may have more leeway in terms of formal versus casual attire, but it's always best to err on the conservative side. Avoid wild ties, attention-grabbing jewelry, strong scents, and gum. If you're concerned about paying for an interview suit, visit the financial aid office. They may be able to provide loans to fund this expense if you're on financial aid. Finally, it's important to have a good attitude. If you project enthusiasm, confidence, and a positive attitude, the employer will sense that you have the ability to be successful in their organization. Remember, people tend to hire people they like. Now let's look at some typical types of interview questions. The first type is commonly called traditional interview questions. These questions are helpful ways for the employer to get to know you better and understand how you perceive yourself. It's important to be honest and open when answering these questions, but at the same time stay concise and to the point. Here are some examples of traditional questions. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why did you choose to attend Harvard? Describe an experience in which you had to adapt to a difficult situation. What do you hope to learn in this position? One of the most common traditional interview questions is, tell me about yourself. Sarah's a senior applying for a job as a teacher. Listen to the contrast between Sarah's two responses to the question, so, tell me about yourself. Here's her first response.
I grew up in San Francisco and went to a large public high school. I played a lot of sports in school and was really active. When I came to college, I was pretty nervous because I was going so far away from my family. But I really enjoy Boston and have gotten involved in a lot of community service in the city. I decided to become a history concentrator, and I really love it because I get to explore so many global issues.
Sarah has provided a lot of background information that's dated and not relevant to the position she's applying for. The interviewer may feel confused by this answer because it lacks focus and doesn't relate to the position. Here's Sarah's second response to the question, "Tell me about yourself."
Well, I'm currently a senior at Harvard. Ever since I started tutoring with the Phillips Brooks House, I've become passionate about education and really love the opportunity to communicate with and mentor high school students. I know I'd like to continue working with students in my career, which is why I'm applying to be a teacher. I'm a history concentrator because I love being able to better understand the world around me, but I also enjoy it because I'd like to help students uncover the relevance of history to their own lives.
In this example, Sarah effectively connects her skills and experience with the teaching position she's applying for. In answering the question, "Tell me about yourself," be brief and focus on your most current and relevant experiences and skills. In this way, your interviewer will have a much better sense of why you're interested in and qualify for the position. The second type of interview question, the behavioral question, is often used because interviewers will assume that your answers will reveal information about you that may predict your behavior in future situations. In most cases, the employer has determined a set of characteristics or competencies that are required to be successful in the available position. Examples of competencies include problem solving, teamwork, communication, and leadership. The employer then designs open-ended questions that ask you to refer back to a particular situation and describe how you responded. A strategy for approaching this type of interview is to think of the answer in three parts: situation, action, and result. What's the situation you want to describe? What action or actions did you take related to the question asked? And what was the result based on that action? Let's look at some examples of behavioral questions. Jeff's a sophomore applying to an internship in healthcare consulting that requires excellent teamwork skills. Listen to how he answers the following behavioral question from an interviewer. "Tell me about a time you were on a team that wasn't working well together."
I tend to get along really well with team members, whether it's in my classes or on my lacrosse team. I hadn't had too many experiences where a team I was on didn't get along. There was one time in a class project where one person didn't do the assignment. We all talked with him about it, but he didn't get it done, and eventually we just had to do a lot of work for him.
In this example, Jeff didn't effectively present a situation and describe how it was resolved. He's overly vague so that the interviewer may not have learned anything about whether Jeff can be an effective team player. It's important that you have something specific to say. Describe your own role and what you learned from the particular situation you cite in a clear and concise manner. Let's listen to Jeff's second response to the question, "Tell me about a time you were on a team that wasn't working well together."
In my psychology class last year, a group of us had to develop a presentation on the theory of cognitive development. One of our group partners was assigned to develop the PowerPoint slides for the presentation, but he didn't have them done by the time they were due. My other team members got angry, but I decided I should have a conversation with him to try to figure out what had happened. By talking with him, I learned that he was having difficulty understanding some of the main concepts. So I put in some extra hours to help him learn the material so he could do his part of the assignment. The experience taught me a lot about not jumping to conclusions and really taking the time to understand and communicate openly with all members of a group.
In this second example, Jeff has successfully explained a specific situation and relevant details rather than remaining vague. He clearly explained his own role and ended with a description of what he learned from the experience, and kept his answer concrete and to the point. The final type of interview question we'll discuss is the case question. Common in some business interviews, particularly with consulting firms, case questions are one way of determining whether or not the candidate has an aptitude for handling complex business problems. A variation on the case question may be a product or market development question for consumer product, service, or brand management firms. Most companies don't expect in-depth business knowledge, but rather are looking to see whether the student has the analytical ability and the business sense to know what matters in a specific situation and can clearly explain it. Most often, employers verbally present a business scenario to the candidate and ask how he or she would approach the problem. Sometimes, employers will present the candidate with a case study in print and allow the candidate a designated period of time to analyze the data. When answering case questions, make sure you understand what's being asked of you. Repeating the question is an effective way of confirming that you're on the right track, and it gives you a moment to think about the situation with which you're faced. Once you're sure you understand what's been presented, don't be afraid to ask a few questions. This may save you from launching into an analysis that lacks focus and misses the point. Then share your thoughts with the interviewer. Taking the time to introduce your approach allows the employer to see that you understand the big picture. Take a look at these sample questions. Be sure to look at the OCS calendar for events and programs where you can practice and learn more about case interviews. A list of resources for answering case questions is available on the OCS website. There are some questions employers cannot ask you, such as information about your age, citizenship, or religious affiliation. A list of questions employers can't ask is available in the OCS publication on interviews. Finally, for any type of interview, it's important to have questions prepared to ask the employer. Usually, it's another way for the employer to measure your interest in the organization, knowledge of the field, maturity, professionalism, and communication skills. It sounds obvious, but you should ask questions to which you want to know the answers. Think of these questions as relating to three components: the position you're applying for, the organization, and the field as a whole. Instead of asking broad, general questions, you can show that you've done your research by asking questions about recent trends in the industry and changes within the organization. Take a look at these sample questions to get a sense of what might be appropriate to ask an employer at the end of the interview. Before leaving for an interview, you should be clear as to the next step. It's helpful to ask when you can expect to hear from the interviewer. As soon as possible after you've left the interview, take notes about what happened. This information will be important if you're invited back for a second interview. Be sure to note information you learned about the organization or the field, what information you'd like to know more about, and your responsibilities in terms of follow-up. Finally, always write a prompt thank you note. While an email is acceptable, a written thank you note can be a great way to make a positive impression. You should express your appreciation, reconfirm your interest in the job, underline how your background and skills would fulfill the responsibilities of the position, and demonstrate you were an active listener by sharing further thoughts about a topic discussed during the interview. For additional help preparing for an interview, attend one of our interview workshops, visit OCS during daily drop-in hours, call or go online to schedule an appointment with a counselor to practice a few interview questions, or stop by anytime Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. to pick up our guide to interviewing. Also be sure to check out the many resources on the OCS website. We hope you enjoyed this online workshop and appreciate your feedback.